huge welcome, everyone. Whether you're dialing in from here in the UK, somewhere else in Europe, in North America or Africa, or maybe beyond, we're incredibly thrilled that you took time out of your day from solving problems and probably putting out lots of fires to join us here today. My name is Charlene Chen, and I am one of the 3 co-founders of Operations Nation. For any of you who might be new to Operations Nation, we're a community-powered knowledge hub designed to provide fellow startup COOs, heads of operations, and other ops professionals with ops-specific content, events, and mentors, so that we not only survive, but thrive at every stage of our operations careers. So for the past 2 years, we've organized an online conference, which maybe you joined previously, to gather startup ops geeks across the globe, but online. And this year, we're so proud to have spearheaded the world's first ever International Operations Festival. In partnership with other operations communities around the world and podcasts such as the Operations Room, COO Secrets by JBM, and Secret Ops. And in case you missed it, the past few days, there were in-person events happening across the globe in London, Berlin, New York City, even Nairobi, Lagos, and Sydney. And we couldn't be more thrilled to wrap up International Ops Fest with this fireside chat with Lila Ibrahim, who is the Chief Operating Officer at Google Deepmind. So before we get started, we'd like to extend a massive thank you to the sponsors of the International Ops Festival, Capsule, Stacker, JBM, and the Office Group, which hosted our conference in London this past Wednesday. So before we kick off this chat with getting to know Lila, I'd like to recognize one of our longtime community members who co-developed these questions with me, Mike Brzezowski, who's the operations lead at Sari Matz. And I'm not ashamed to admit that I also consulted ChatGPT and Bard. So Lila, a huge welcome. Look, you've had such an incredibly interesting and varied journey in your career. We'd love to kick it off by just understanding, how did you get into ops from being an engineer, and how did you transition throughout your career?
Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you all. And thank you, Charlene, and congratulations. I really wish throughout my career I had had a network like this to make sense of different roles I've had, like chief of staff or even COO in a startup. Okay, so your question was, how did I end up at this point after such a varied background, starting off in engineering? And maybe I'll just kind of quickly, so to level set with everyone, and also maybe just to give you kind of everyone a scope of the range of types of questions they can answer. I'll take you kind of a whirlwind tour of my career. I did start off as an electrical engineer on something called the Pentium processor during my 18 years at Intel. And so I was very much involved in like microprocessor design, motherboards, computer systems. And then I had a chance to actually go work more with customers. It was really an amazing experience to actually see how the technology was going to be implemented. And I think once that kind of opened, when my eyes opened towards that, it just started me on this journey. I spent a couple of years in Japan working on a technology called DVD. At the time, everyone thought I was crazy, because why would I leave go off my career path and work on this technology that no one knew about? No one was ever going to watch movies on a computer, was the saying back then. So it's very funny to look back. And I realized whether it was starting Intel's developer program based in Hong Kong, I ended up leading our education and emerging markets group based out of Shanghai. I was chief of staff to the CEO. And I would say that that's really was where the transition happened. I was always a general purpose person who understood the technology and understood how to help that translate between technology, people, and getting things done. And that's why even I didn't have a business degree. I don't have that background, but the CEO and chairman of Intel took a bet on me and gave me one of the most powerful lines of my career, which was, Pathfinders end up with more arrows in their back than in their front. Stop occasionally. Let me pull them out so you can run further faster. And I would say after 18 years at Intel of pathfinding and being a pioneer in new spaces, I got recruited into venture capital, and I was curious of, I'd been an entrepreneur. How do I take that to be work with entrepreneurs? So I went to Kleiner Perkins, working with the legendary investor John Doerr, and he made the first investments in Amazon and in Google. And he asked me to be his chief of staff and help him lead some of the operational aspects, both within the firm, but also help being an operating partner with venture capital, with our investments in startups. So I got to apply my experience to help others build their companies. But I really missed building. So I went into Coursera as the first, hopefully there's some Coursera learners on here, as the first first COO and president, the first executive hire. And I helped build, along with the founders, the company pre-IPO. And then I was going to take a year off because I realized my entire career had been going in to help build or fix things at critical moments in their history. It never made sense at the time, but only in looking back did it all come together. And that is when John Doerr, my former the partner at Kleiner Perkins, said, you've got to meet this founder, Demis Hassabis, who's based in London. He's working on AI. And I'm like, I don't want to move to London. I'm not sure I can handle the weather. My background is not in AI. And I'm not a PhD student. I only have my bachelor's degree. And John said, you should really think about it. And I thought I was doing a favor to John. And instead, I ended up spending about 50 hours interviewing because I thought at this critical moment in my career, after 30 years, and I want to be very thoughtful about where I go and why. And the more I learned about AI, I thought this is an amazing potential to benefit humanity, but could go wrong so many different ways. And I felt an obligation to the legacy I had built to my children. And I had a very much deep conversation with my family about what impact could I have in AI and its development back in 2018. And I often call it felt like a moral calling of if I could bring my experience of being a generalist and builder of working with people and technology and a through line of social impact, then I kind of owe it to history to contribute that. It has been an amazing 5 years. I would not have predicted this year would have unfolded the way it has. And I'm sure we'll get to that. But it has been, I feel very much like I am at the right place at the right time for my career, for where the technology is at, in my very circuitous, weird career that I could have never predicted. Suddenly looking back, whether it was working with academics and technology, social impact, it all makes sense for this role at this time. Very long answer, but hopefully that sets the stage for the conversation we can have.
No, that's absolutely wonderful, Lila. I mean, I've had the privilege of meeting a lot of wonderful ops leaders over the years, who have all come in different shapes and sizes. But I think you have a particularly unique and special trajectory. And also just want to say, as I'm sure our audience will find, you're so incredibly humble and down to earth for someone who has worked for some of the companies and firms that have really transformed the globe. So want to thank you for being here with us today.
Thank you. By the way, if I can just really quickly pick up on that, it's interesting. I've heard that comment before, and my feeling has been that's part of what's made me successful is I never tried to be someone I wasn't. And I think sometimes in operating roles, you feel like you need to adjust to accommodate. And I think you do have to understand how, the context of what you're working in. But the fact that throughout my career, I've always been authentic, it's too much work, candidly, to try to be someone that you're not. So I never pretended to be someone I wasn't. And I did for 6 months, and it was too much work. And I'm just it was a hard lesson in the age of 24. But I think to your point of like, this is kind of what makes us all be able to do what we do and do it well, is just by showing up for who we are and what we know how to do best.
I love it. Well, you're coming across as incredibly authentic. And I would add that, what I think about being an ops leader is we're tearing our hair out, just trying to juggle 10 different things. So I don't find that we have much energy to put up a facade or fake it. So, but thank you for sharing that. Okay, so one more question before we get into the juicy topic of AI, which is that COO roles come in all different shapes and sizes. So it'd be great just for those who aren't actually familiar with what DeepMind does, then it'd be great to hear like generally like what's the two sentence of what DeepMind does and what is your specific role? Like what does the COO role entail at DeepMind?
Great. Well, yes, you're absolutely right. I think every role, chief of staff or chief operating officer, has been different, and it really depends on where the organization is at and what skills I have to bring to the table. DeepMind was founded in 2010, headquartered in London. It was the founders met at UCL, the university here, and the idea was to bring together a diverse group of AI researchers that wouldn't normally meet up in an academic environment. And through this interdisciplinary approach, the audacious mission was solve intelligence and use it to solve everything else. And really at the core is this mission of how do we advance science and technology breakthroughs through AI to benefit humanity. So that was kind of the essence of what DeepMind was built from its founding in 2010 until earlier this year when we merged with Google Brain. So along the way, we were acquired by Google about 5 years into the company's life. And then earlier this year, we merged with Google Brain to form a larger, more focused AI research group for Google products, and then also to take the technology out. So you may hear me referring to DeepMind or Google DeepMind, and it's just I'm referring to different times in my journey. My role is quite unique. So what I started with is quite different than how the role has evolved, because the organization was much smaller and more focused as a frontier AI research lab. My job consists of 3 different parts. The first is overseeing the day-to-day operations of how the company is running and working. And that includes things like program management, people and culture, our workplace experience team, legal, teams like that. The other part of my job is overseeing all of our responsibility and governance work. So how do we think about ethics research, long-term strategic governance of AI, and more powerful, more general AI, all of our internal governance processes, et cetera. And then the final part is how do we engage with the external world? So here are groups like marketing and communications. We also have something called the Google DeepMind Institute, which is how we take our research to really enable ecosystems. AlphaFold, which we can talk about, is one of those, of how do we work with biologists in the community. Climate is another area, as well as education. So it's quite a wide-ranging set of roles and responsibility, but I think that's it's exciting, and I'm very fortunate to have had the past 5.5 years to really build the team and the processes and frameworks to get to this point.
Amazing. And we'll definitely come back to your role and kind of the evolution of operations and your advice for all of us as we scale operations in our respective companies. But let's get on to the AI, continue the AI conversation as you thankfully described what DeepMind does. So I'm just going to, in case any of these acronyms from the great alphabet soup of AI acronyms, I'm just going to define a few. I don't know, Lila, if you're going to actually reference them, but just in case. So ML for machine learning, NLP for natural language processing, LLM Oh no, I've just forgotten
Large
this.
language model.
Thank you. Large language model. Thank you. Gen AI, generative AI. Of course, I put myself on the spot. I was going to ask you to define them. But I'd love to hear, just broadly speaking, what excites you most about the potential of the latest developments in AI? And that can be either what you see at DeepMind or just kind of more broadly, since you clearly follow the industry closely with your external role.
Yeah, I mean, it's a great question. I think the world this year has kind of woken up to generative AI, and there's a lot of excitement around it. We've had these technologies in our labs for a while now, so I understand that the excitement and the way that it's opening the way folks think about possibility and risk, which has been really helpful to have out in the public conversation these days. But the thing from my perspective is, like, to me, these large language models and are just a first step in a very long journey. And what excites me is actually how do we use AI to better understand the universe and address some of humanity's biggest challenges. I'll give let me share maybe more about AlphaFold. We released an AI model that has predicted all 200 plus million known proteins known to humans. And proteins are important because they're the basic building block of life. And if you can predict how it'll, from a string of amino acids, how it folds, you can also predict how it misfolds. We worked with about 36 people experts from industry as we were doing this work. And it's like a 50-year plus challenge that in the field of biology. And we were curious, like, should we release it? Have we thought about things properly? Really testing a lot of our approach. And they basically said, no, you should release this. So we published a database. And now, instead of a PhD student spending 4 years of trying to predict a protein structure, someone can go just as easy as a search or a map and access a free database and find this out. It has really transformed. It's kind of, if you think about like science at digital speed, that's what we believe we've enabled. And now what's really amazing is scientists around the world are using this to understand diseases so they can come up with better solutions. We're doing a lot of work with the Neglected Disease Institute looking at issues in the global south that haven't been addressed by anybody despite decades and loss of lives. So that's something I'm particularly excited about. But also, how do you deal with like the climate situation and industrial waste? So I'm very excited. This is just in the field of biology. We're looking in other areas of science. And the thought is, if we can unlock a understanding, how might that really enable an entire set of specialists to advance their work and their contributions to provide a better future for us all?
Amazing. Thanks so much for sharing that. And I just want to bring that back to your calling towards social impact. And it's really good to know that, like all technologies, you're really thinking and working for a company that's driving AI for good. Whereas I'm sure people have already seen there's applications that create more harm than good. So it's great to see that. And I liked your mention of the global south as well, where often there are challenges, especially in healthcare, that are overlooked, mainly because of the cost, and biotech companies don't want to invest billions of dollars in R&D to serve populations that have a lower willingness to or ability to pay. So now keep in mind, we've got a bunch of ops people on this call, so I'm not going to let you get away without geeking out on some ops with us, and that intersection of, in our intersection between ops and AI, which has been a hot topic in our Slack community and in our metaphysical hallways. So recognizing, to set expectations that, y'all have heard now what DeepMind does and what Lila's experience is with it. So, DeepMind's not explicitly working in these B2B or B2C applications of AI, but are there any areas of operations where you think that AI could positively impact internal or external operations? And then I'll throw out a few that I'm excited about as well.
Yeah, it's a great question, and we are. I am talking with other organizations and with my colleagues across Google as well on how we can use AI. It's showing up in really interesting ways, whether it's optimizing data centers or adaptive technology or better search results and recommendations. But when I look back and say, where do I think how we can apply this across building organizations? There's a couple areas I'm particularly excited about. And one is, I do feel that as organizations do more around AI, how do you set up your internal governance? We do a lot of red teaming, so a lot of testing of our own models before we feel comfortable even releasing it to our colleagues across Google to build it into product. And when you're doing that, even internally, you can be exposed to some harmful content. So how do you think about building this in from all parts of quality control as well? And how do you think about also on customer ops, so that you think about prioritizing and triaging human interaction is good, but can we use AI as a tool, much like technology has been used as a tool? So I think there's a lot of way here if you think about AI as a tool with humans to either increase productivity, to deal with potentially harmful or content as a triaging, to make more efficient, or to just be able to scale more. I think those are the areas that I'm particularly interested and excited to hear your thoughts as well on how this could be useful.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. Yeah, you mentioned one of the categories. So a lot of us deal with customer ops. And I think for us, it's probably, I don't know if it's safe to say, one of the first applications that we experienced, like the first time we either used as a consumer or implemented a chatbot in our startups, which really helps our customer support teams actually focus on things that don't automatically fall in the most frequently asked questions. But that one's particularly interesting to me in terms of having a knowledge base database that customers can quickly query without having to speak with a customer support agent. People ops. So one of the biggest pain points for all of us as operations folks is we're constantly hiring. And I can't tell you how many hours I personally spent screening CVs in my name how many years of experience, but using AI to automate candidate screening, summarizing candidate CVs, even doing skills assessment, and then I haven't seen this in action, but predicting employee turnover, finance ops. So some of us ops people don't love finance, but it can often fall under our roles. So, just some support with a little bit automated forecasting, some budgeting, expense tracking, that would save us a lot of time. Sales ops. So increasingly, we as operations folks are in revenue ops, or either directly or indirectly. And so, the idea of summarizing sales calls, automating admin tasks, providing sales predictions, summarizing improving lead scoring. And then the next one, legal ops. So this was a surprise to me as a COO, is how many contracts we have to look at, from a customer perspective, but writing terms and conditions or reviewing employee law. So it's not our expertise. So we often need tools that support us. So there's an application there of drafting, reviewing, or summarizing contracts. And then often BI, or business intelligence, falls under the COO, right? So it's I don't know about you, but I don't program R. I'm not a great, I'm not great at SQL queries. So if I could use AI to, process and analyze large amounts of data, that would be really helpful, because we as ops leaders really should be we should all be making data-driven decisions, but it's difficult to process data. Sorry, I think someone, oh yeah, there's some background noise. All of us could really do our jobs better and make decisions faster if we could have a little bit of support. And I'll just mention a couple other ones for those of y'all on the call who might be working in more physical products, so supply chain ops or manufacturing. So I'm really intrigued by the applications of AI to optimize inventory management, do demand forecasting, maybe automate logistics. And then same with manufacturing. So I watched a great, and maybe we can share this afterwards, Andrew Ng from Deep Learning AI and also lectures at Stanford.
And Coursera, he was one of the founders of Coursera.
Oh, yes, and of course, co-founder of Coursera. He used the example of pizza inspection, which I thought was a really good one. So that's having, like a low-level employee, like inspecting every pizza to see if it's covered with enough cheese and ingredients. If you could just have an AI bot checking out quality control, that would be great. So anyways, that's a long list, but I just wanted to make sure that we honored, because there's so many ops people on the call, like there are real life practical applications beyond.
And we haven't even talked about content moderation or fraud. There's so much. I think one way to think about this, actually, Charlene, and you've just given a great example of it, is like the world as we know it today, like AI will permeate every aspect of how we work and live. It's going to have the smallest footprint it's ever going to have is that footprint it has this year. And so I think it's going to be really exciting, an opportunity for all of us to think about how do we use this technology in a responsible way and as a tool to do our work better so we can add our special expertise in.
Well, thank you for sharing that. And that's a perfect segue to the next section of our talk, which is about risk management. And you mentioned that, part of your role as the COO is to cover kind of the responsibility and kind of make sure that there's good governance, both within DeepMind, but also I'm sure to liaise with other AI leaders. So COOs are often de facto chief risk officers. So I'd love if you could just elaborate a bit more on what are some of the concrete risks of ops leaders who are implementing AI solutions, whether that's GDPR, confidential corporate information, and I'm sure this is more your expertise than mine.
Yeah, and the way that I think about it and the way that we think about it here at Google Deepmind is kind of actually, it's more like a continuum of risk. So you've got the near-term responsibility risk that everyone that's quite prevalent in conversation today. So this is stuff like bias, misinformation, representation. We're talking a lot about large models that are trained off certain amounts of data, but we still have large populations around the world who are either not even connected into the internet or whose information may either be misrepresented of the population as a whole. And so I think that's a very real issue and concern. So if you think about that as one part of the continuum, the other one is other areas around misuse of how might people misuse the technology. And then there's a longer term conversation, a conversation around longer term risks that are more around control. Who is in control of the technology? Whose values is the AI aligned to? So what does it mean to align with human values? And a lot of times that group of risks you'll hear termed around like safety risks. And so we think about it in terms of that continuum. We feel like that's part of our responsibility. And what we've been trying to do is work with governments worldwide, civil society, other organizations in making sure that we're being explicit about the range. And in fact, we had when we first developed some large language models, we held back on our technical paper until we had an ethics paper around how to talk about the taxonomy of large models, both the risk and the opportunity, so that we could have a global conversation in this space. And that was several years ago. So we think in the continuum of risk. And then the way that we think internally about how do we manage that spectrum, the first is really about, do we have the right governance in place, responsible governance? Do we have the right responsible research and development? And then responsible deployment. So if I could unpack each one of these, The responsible governance. So an example here is we have a cross-functional group where members rotate on a set basis. We have active deliberation against a set of AI principles that we hold ourselves to account that include both risk and opportunity. We have kept an active case file on this from the very beginning. And in fact, when we first had the conversations, what I found was getting people around the table. Everyone cared, right? Like since DeepMind's founding in 2010, we've had these basic principles. This is like predating any organization having a set of principles. DeepMind had them. And it was, how do you operationalize it so that it's, and everyone believed it, signed up for it when they joined, but how do you actually operationalize this and how does it come to fruition? And what I found is people felt like experts in their field, but they didn't know what other parts of the organization. So they didn't really they felt so much responsibility, they were worried to think about the downstream implications. So the first few meetings we had was really, I called it the meeting to be named later. It was the meeting to be named later to take away any of the stress. And it was trying to create a psychologically safe space for people to have questions, debates, share ideas. And we've done a lot of active work in building that. And it's like one meeting I still to this day continue to be engaged in. So responsible governance is really key, and having leadership engagement is an important part because it shows that it's a company priority. The other part is responsible research and development. So this can be everything from like, do you have a diverse research team? Not only, and diversity can come in a lot of different ways. It could be computer scientists with neuroscientists and ethicists. It can be gender diversity, racial diversity, ethnic diversity, et cetera. So we think about it both in terms of the teams and the functions and expertise they bring. But we also think about it in terms of the type of research we do. So for example, we've done a lot of work around queer fairness. We've done work around decolonial AI. I mentioned some of our work around how do we have taxonomy around how do we talk about risk and opportunities. And just yesterday, we published a paper on how to do, for generative AI, how to do evaluations and what needs to be considered the more complex AI gets. And then the final is responsible deployment. I gave an example before on AlphaFold. And for us, this has meant like we don't release a paper on every research we do. When we release models, we're very thoughtful about how to do it in partnership, either through Google products, or as I mentioned, like the AlphaFold database, where we consulted with outside experts. And we've done a lot of convenings with civil society to really unpack what that means on responsible deployment, which we can cover later if that's of interest. If I could leave everyone here with one message, it would be responsibility is a key thing to build in from the beginning. It's also not the sexiest thing, and it's hard because there is no clear answer. And it's where leadership is absolutely required, because you're making the best decision you can with the information you have, and you need to have that Kaizen, this continuous learning and improvement. So how do you come back to decisions? What have you learned? And that safe space to have the conversations and to continually assess yourself, but also be bold and courageous and take chances when you need to take chances. Otherwise, nothing would ever get released. So I think it's really important to invest in building the right culture for this and evolving it as the organization, as the technology, and as you as a leader evolve.
Oh, amazing. So much to learn from. And as I said before, we're wearing so many hats as ops leaders and COOs that it's really difficult when there's a lot of change management, and we're delving into areas that we may not understand well ourselves. And so to be a good supervisor and governor and steward of resources, both human, financial, and technological, is really hard. But I'd love to.
Yeah, and I think the important thing there is you don't need to be the expert, but playing that role of facilitator, enabler, being willing to make the decisions when you need to make the decisions, having people's back so that they they can focus on their area of expertise. I think those are examples of different ways that we all can show up.
I love that. Well, it's again perfect segue into and just I'm kind of keeping an eye on time, so I'm going to start embedding some of the audience questions as well. But the topic today was scaling operations with or without AI. So I want to make sure that we talk about some of the important things because I think we've all learned, however long our careers have been, that technology can be a great tool, it can be a great platform, and it can enable a lot of great things, but it doesn't solve all challenges, right? And ultimately, like, we're a bunch of human beings working together in human organizations. So to kick that part off, I'd love to hear. I mean, you've had this amazing career from Intel and Kleiner Perkins. And by the way, in case people didn't pick up on John Doerr, he's like the godfather or one of the godfathers of like OKRs and wrote Measure What Matters. So if you're like, why does that name sound so familiar? I just wanted to connect the dots. And then also, being a leader at Coursera and Google, how have you seen operations? And I know that's a super broad term, but like, how have you seen operations evolve over your career, whether that's systems or processes?
Yeah, and I've also gone from an organization like Intel where you're manufacturing things and there's actual supply chain that you need to think about, into Coursera, as a knowledge service, and into the work here in AI. There's ventures very much about the business of ideas. I think the operations means different things in different organizations. And what I find is people outside of operational roles sometimes don't understand the complexity. They appreciate it and understand it, but sometimes our roles are to not cause fires and like to figure out how to navigate it. But people understand fires very well. So I feel one of the things I've really learned is that, first of all, everyone comes with their own perspective. So people should not be taking that personally. Like if someone does something or says something to you, part of it may just be an education or a knowledge or an understanding. So I think there's an opportunity here of how do you turn that into a learning moment of explaining, hey, giving the context. So what I have learned next is, how do you make the implicit explicit? Can you give the context of like why you need to know something or why something has to work this way, what it is you're trying to accomplish, and then how you're going to go about it, or how you'll circle back with them with an update. And I find that's kind of the human part. If you can give the context, help them have shared knowledge, how they can help contribute to this, and close the loop of, okay, just to let you know this was done, really appreciate your value. They're starting to see now how you're creating value for the work that they're doing. So I think it's almost like this demystifying what is operations. The one thing I have learned in venture capital, and which is not necessarily operational, and into startups and into more of a unique, more of a scientific academic environment here, is you have to right size the operations. So you mentioned OKRs. OKRs in an organization like Intel, where we were manufacturing things and customers were dependent on that quantity at that time so that they could grow, they could deliver on their business. It's very different than trying to do scientific research. So you can't, the OKRs for Intel look very different than the OKRs do they did at DeepMind. So I think there's something, or in a startup. So there's something about how do you take the essence of what you're trying to do and right size it for the culture. When I started at DeepMind, I had the luxury of spending the first few months with my ethnographer hat on, admiring and appreciating everything that had been built. Even though I was the first COO, it's tremendous the breakthroughs the organization had in building the organization and delivering. It was my job to say, where to help understand where do we need to go and how are we going to get there. But that all started from understanding the culture, the how to get things done, and really respecting everything that had been built.
Oh, thank you for sharing all of that. Yeah, I love how you actually took an approach. It wasn't really about what we would traditionally call hardcore operations, but you talked more about like kind of the approach the leadership approach. Yeah, I get, and also some things can be timeless but adapt, right? So OKRs methodology has been around for a long time and it has lived on. And I might admit that a lot of us actually have a love-hate relationship with OKRs because most of us struggle to implement them properly. But that's a whole nother fireside chat.
The essence of an OKR is really from the company Intel. John Doerr got it from his time at Intel.
Yes.
The essence of OKRs is a communication tool.
Yeah.
And I think that sometimes gets lost in the translation of trying to make measurable OKRs. It's really, this is something that can easily be scaled.
Amazing. Well, so I guess it'd be great to kind of summarize the kind of the role, because I said I wanted at the beginning of the conversation, I wanted to come back to kind of what are the skills and traits that you feel have been most valuable in your multiple COO roles. So I'd love to hear, like, please share, what do you think are the most important skills, either what we call hard or human, as opposed to hard and soft, technical and human skills that you believe a COO needs to be successful as her company scales?
Yeah. First of all, you have to have a passion for the mission and an understanding of what the organization is trying to do. I may not be a biologist, and I'm a hardware engineer by background, but my curiosity and interest in really talking to people, understanding what they're doing, and being willing to constantly learn, that growth mindset. So I would say passion for what the organization is working on, and then kind of that curiosity is critical. You use the word human skills. When I was at Coursera, I used to call it power skills, because actually I think that's really what is important and helps you. And candidly, so much of everybody's work these days is so interdisciplinary in nature, which is quite different from where I started my career 30 years ago. And so I think understanding, like, how do you show up as empathetic, but also not trying to save and rescue every single person. Like, there's this boundary that you need to hold, but authenticity, empathy, curiosity, communication, those are all really important. Like being able to manage and meet expectations, right? That's all a communication skill. I think those are the ones that have served me well in my career. And then one of the things I sometimes didn't appreciate, there's a couple of things that I don't necessarily know about myself, but other people have told me. One is that I will always say it like it is. I think even early in my career, my management, those above me, really appreciated that. And I didn't realize that at the time, but what they really appreciated was that I brought a different view than what they knew or what they had been served up. So I'm a firm believer in kind of knowing what your diverse perspective is, and how do you bring that in a way that is helps other people achieve more with that knowledge. And then the other thing that I've realized is I came from more of a technical background, and I am a non-traditional operator. And sometimes I watch these folks and they're like so articulate and crisp, and they know exactly what to say and when, and that's just not me. Like, I'm not a scripted person. But my thing is, like, I think I have also been told that, like, people connect with the way that I talk because I use simple words because that's how I think. English was my second language. So I think there's something here, which is, you don't have to be, back to what we talked about earlier, you don't have to be somebody else. Like, figure out what your strengths are. And if you don't know your strengths, have other people tell you what they appreciate, or appreciate what you're bringing to the table. Because sometimes we get so lost in our heads thinking about everything we don't have that we forget what we do bring to the table. And I think that's especially true in operational roles, where we can often sometimes be the glue or the enablers to help people and things get things done, and sometimes may undersell the value we bring, because what's easy for us may be impossible for someone else.
Oh, you're preaching to the choir. Well, yeah, first off, I just want to say you're actually an incredibly eloquent speaker. So, scripted or not, let me affirm you that you're an amazing communicator. And also want to acknowledge what you said too about, as ops leaders, we often are that glue, and it's hard to measure stickiness, right? It's hard to measure the stickiness of an org or the comms that we facilitated or nudged in between individuals, in between teams, in between leaders, in between functions. So a lot of the stuff we do can be measured, but a lot of the stuff that we do to keep the lights on and keep everybody working together isn't always seen. And so we tend to be undervalued and underappreciated, but it's good to be affirmed that by you. Great. I want to squeeze in, there's 2 audience questions I think we have time for. So let's get back to technology in case some of you guys are like, hey, I want to hear more about, AI and tech. Okay, so one of our amazing community members, Jeff Courtney, is asking, what do you see as the most important skills when it comes to bringing new technology, including AI, to markets and new domains? So like, how do you bridge that tech and people divide? And then I think actually I can roll in a sub question, which I apologize, I'm not going to be able to pronounce this name, so I'm not going to botch it. But how do you change the perception of using AI as a threat to jobs? So there's technology in general, bringing new tech, and then when people feel threatened by that technology.
Yeah, and I've had the benefit of seeing new technologies to market. I mentioned working on the standards around DVD and USB, and then also building out the internet into countries and communities where it had never been, bringing computers in, even into classrooms. I have a nonprofit on the side, and we do a lot of work around that stemmed from my time at Intel. And I remember people very worried about computers taking away teachers' jobs. And we had a saying back in my Intel days of computers aren't magic, teachers are. And it's something I firmly believe, that like the technology is the tool. And if you can find examples of the positive, which is part of the reason why around AI, I try to talk about what the positive potential is. We need to understand the risk. We need to have that conversation. We need to talk about things like regulation and with policymakers, et cetera. And we also have to talk about the potential, because we wouldn't be in this field if we didn't believe in the upside opportunity. I would say on these leading edge technologies, finding those positive proof points, but doing it in a way that's in collaboration with society is critical. I learned this in my days of doing some of the internet build out at Deepmind. We've done some things where we've done work with educators, communities, with people with disabilities or differing abilities. We did something with the Aspen Institute about a blueprint for equitable AI, where we deliberately gather these communities together and have open conversations and try to and have the deliberations and then publish a report. So the Aspen Institute, we did something on building a blueprint for building equitable AI, which we talk about with policymakers and others, because we have to, I think, to land the technology, when you're doing something, you really have to make sure that civil society and communities are involved. Public trust is important, as is conversations with government. So we've been doing a lot of work over the years with policymakers. This year it's come front and center, whether it's the White House commitments or the upcoming UK AI summit. Cool. So I think just realizing that when you're bringing a new technology to market, your responsibility is not only to the technology, but it's also to the communities, the public sector and civil society. And I think that's, you just have to build that into your plans, even when it's uncomfortable, but it's important.
Thanks for sharing that. Yeah, it's a really tough one. I mean, I think whether it's AI or otherwise, there's always this tension and fear of like, how's this going to impact me as an individual? How's this going to impact my team, my company, society, et cetera? And so I think one thing that I'm hearing is like, yeah, there's positives. There's an upside and downside to everything. But if we as society kind of just stayed stagnant and weren't willing to try and embark on innovation and new things, then, we'd stay stagnant. And I think that's
Well,
the mindset. Oh,
and part of it is just having the conversation,
yeah.
right? Like,
Yes.
go pull together a set of your peers or in the sector that you serve and have an open conversation over a coffee about what you think the opportunities are, what you think the risks are, what are potential solutions. But I think part of it, what I'm excited about this year, 2023, is that we're having those conversations more broadly. And it's not just within our organizations or within the AI labs, but society wants to know. So we're able to be bringing some of these conversations to the forefront. And I would just encourage your members to like actively engage in leading the conversation internally in your organizations and with fellow travelers.
Yeah, and one of the resources we can share afterwards is one of our community members, Mike Pallett, actually like organized a webinar on. It was actually on accelerating ChatGPT adoption within your business. But what stood out to me when watching the webinar was that it really walked people through the process of the benefits. And for all ops leaders, like, what do we care about? We care about saving time, saving money, like being more efficient. Like, we thrive off of operational efficiency. And so, I definitely get that people feel threatened, but it's like, well, if all of us, whether we're ops employees or leaders, could be spending less time doing more menial manual tasks, it allows us time, and we'll still have jobs to do more strategic, stuff. So I feel like I don't see it as kind of a substitute, but it's more additive. But anyways.
Yeah, and I think this is kind of this is where I'm like, AI is definitely different. But we also have a lot of learnings we've gotten over the past 3 decades I've been in tech. And so the fact that we can have these conversations, I think is a lot different. And so quickly the conversations are happening than when internet was coming in or even social media. So I think there's a lot we can learn from history, as well as thinking about what might be the same or different with AI.
Okay, so one last question before we wrap it up, or to wrap it up. So we always like to wrap up our Operations Nations events with something applicable or tangible for audience members to take back into their day-to-day jobs and to their career paths. So knowing now what you know about scaling operations over the past couple decades, what advice would you give to current or aspiring operations leaders?
One is you're never going to have as much time as you have now. So make time to invest in yourself, because the more your organization develops, the more you get established in the role, the more people depend on you, the less time you will have. So it's good to build the habit in from the beginning of investing in your own development. And if you're curious about AI, there's plenty of resources. Coursera, as an example, a little bit biased given my background, but Andrew Ng has some courses up there that are available to learn more about AI. It's not going anywhere. So if you're going to learn about it, good to learn about things from early on. The second thing is figure out who your personal board of advisors are, because one of the things I have found is I never fit a really nice job definition. People kept trying to put me into a box of like what I should be or who I should be. And that's, triggers all sorts of emotions with me. So I have learned to have a board of personal advisors, and they're not friends and they're not family, because friends and family will try to protect you sometimes in a way that your personal board of advisors won't. Instead, they will challenge you to think about, is this, what's right for you, and how do you want to think about things, and where could you develop? And that board of advisors will vary in your career depending on where you're at and what organization. And sometimes they'll give you the confidence, sometimes they'll be the sounding board, sometimes they'll ask you the really tough question that no one else will ask you, but that's important for you. But in that, always make sure that they have your back, because I think as being a generalist, there's a lot of benefits. And I think you have to just learn how to stay true to yourself, and your board of advisors can help you with that.
Oh, I love that. Board of advisors sounds so much more friendly than, well, I won't comment on all boards. I sit on a few myself. But yeah, I think it can be perceived as quite scary, but a board of advisors should be one that really, yeah, challenges you in a great way and helps you grow. I love that. It's wonderful. I feel like we could chat for so many more hours. Lila, we can, on behalf of the entire Operations Nation community and beyond, we thank you so much for taking time out of what I know from checking your LinkedIn is a very, very, very busy schedule. So thank you so much.
Thank you all, and wishing you all well. Take care.
Bye, Lila. Thank you. So if you liked what you heard today and you're intrigued and you want to keep geeking out on operations or AI or anything related, please follow us on LinkedIn or visit our website, which is operationsnation.com, and join our free Slack community if you're not already a part of it.